Alright, time for another video. This one, if that doesn't give it away, is gonna be about political religion and just general behavior of ideologies. Apologies for not making a video the last 2 days, but it's the weekend, that's time off. So me and a person took the opportunity to relax a bit. Anyways, on another note, let's get into it. So, one might ask, well, why would you call something a political religion? What I mean by that is essentially ideology. See, when it comes to politics, the ideas that we have in relation to them function in many ways like a religion. For example, liberalism. It has principles, liberty, equality, fraternity, rules to follow, respect others, allow them to do what they want in the comfort of their own home, as long as it doesn't harm others, and other such prescriptions. This is similar to how, for example, Christianity will say, there are 10 commandments: no God before me, no murder, no adultery. Well, actually, it's cover your neighbor's wife, but still. They have such principles, and then rules to follow, such as how you should behave, what you should do, all that. This is exactly why, for example, you have people like the socialists who will straight up say, we cannot believe in Christianity because socialism is what is needed to replace it. When it comes to ideologies, they function almost like religions in their own sense, especially if they're on the sidelines of the belief systems that people have for politics. So think like socialists, fascists, libertarians. Those who are on the fringes, due to their nature, must be far more fervent about their beliefs than, say, establishment liberal. What this means, in effect, is that so long as an ideology is in charge of a state, it will inherently try to convert those around it. When there's a conflict between, say, the socialists and liberals over how things should be run, what naturally comes is the liberal will try to essentially encourage their values among the socialists. At the same time, the socialists will respond by doing the same, or just rejecting outright the liberal propositions. This also applies to organized religion as well. Organized religion, due to its nature as well, a religion, does not like changing its principles easily. However, when you have a state of an ideology which does not agree with the religion, so one that isn't traditionalist, doesn't hold to the values in the religion, etc., you find conflict. It is why so many modern ideologies are anti-clerical or secular. They wish to get the organized religion out of politics because it does not agree with their sensibilities. For example, Christianity and its willingness to judge based on one's actions does not go along with the equality promised by the liberal. So for these two to coexist, one must inherently abandon some of its own aspects. Oftentimes, it is the weaker one, so organized religion in a liberal society, that must give up part of its identity. It is where you see much more liberal Christians who adopt policies that do not align with Christian ideology and Christian belief systems. But they're in a liberal society based on liberal principles. So, if that means, say, scrapping the whole, but just smirch your brother for his sins, while still accepting him back into the fold if he repents, then that's what you should do. Apologies. It seems the fan's on. Anyways, back to the point. So that's the biggest thing with it. So long as there's ideology and religion, they will be combative because they take up the same spot, faith, in a human's life. Faith is important, without question. But the reason the two conflict is because it's hard to have faith in different things. especially actively opposing things. So for a Christian, if they are following the Bible to the letter, as it states, they are going to find issues with the modern liberal, because the modern liberal puts their faith in, liberty, equality, fraternity. These belief systems they have. They put their faith in that and believe that if they follow these principles and apply them to the letter in the law, they will make a better world. Will they? Another question, but that's what they have faith in. The Christian, on the other hand, believes if they put Christian principles into the law, then better things will come out of it. Or at the very least, if individuals become Christian and follow the Bible, there will be better outcomes. Now, heaven, naturally speaking, is something that the Christians have that the liberal does not. The liberal makes no care about death. To the liberal, after death does not matter, generally speaking. In fact, one of the big things for them when they were founded was trying to separate religion from them. So, because they're very materialistic, they just care about the here and now. This means that when they were forming, they had to separate themselves from the religious who cared about things like the afterlife. And they did this, with Leviathan, saying, the point of the state is to, inherently, make sure that people are unequal so that they don't kill each other. That is the entire liberal proposition. Well, not the entire one, but it was the first. And with that came, effectively, the first justification for an idea or belief system of ruling absent God, which was basically unheard of at the time it was initially conceived, because at that time, basically every ruling class had some religious justification. From Europe to Asia to the Americas. Basically everyone claimed some religious justification. For example, many tribes in the Americas claimed they were following their ancestors' wisdom, which came from the spirits. Many Europeans claim that it is God who has ordained the monarch to rule for them. Well, in the case of Russia, they just decided they were in charge because they were Rome somehow, for believing the same religion as the Byzantines. It's like Eastern Romans, that's more accurate. And then there's the Ottomans, who were just, they were kind of weird. As for Asia, there was obviously the Ming and later Qing dynasties who claimed the mandate of heaven. Japanese had the blood of Amaterasu in their emperor, with the shogun ruling basically as a sort of permanent regent for the emperor. That was until Meiji. And in Africa, tribes largely copied the natives. Well, I say copy. They largely came to the same conclusion as the Indians. And they said, alright, see, because we are following our ancestors' wisdom, and our ancestors are venerated, therefore, we are following the spirits. The liberals were really the first who said, no God, no spirits. The reason we exist is because equality is bad. And in order to prevent the damage equality causes, we need an unequal leviathan of a state to protect the people from themselves. Now, this is part of the reason they developed as their own ideology rather than mixing with ideologies of the time. But also, it's where we can clearly see the religious nature of an ideology. No matter which branch of liberalism you follow, classical, market, modern, neo, no matter which branch of liberalism you have, there's still always that assumption of equality, liberty, fraternity. How you interpret where the line is drawn and other such things is debatable, but it's still there. There are still key principles, and they cannot be challenged by outside forces, otherwise, well, they'd be wrong then. So you have a situation where they act almost like different sects. similar to how Catholics, Protestant denominations, and the Orthodox will all say, yeah, we follow the Bible, Old and New Testament, together, but because of point A, B, C, D, we are separate because we disagree on these core ideas. So essentially, every principle aligns, but how to interpret them and the base of it is where we get the confliction. For example, there are liberals who believe equality is innately good. These follow the whole, I believe it's Rousseau, it might be someone else, but it was one of the Enlightenment philosophers who argued that people are naturally equal in the wild and thus free in the state of nature. He was freaking wrong about that, but yeah, who am I to poke holes in one of the longest lived ideologies of the modern era? There's also, of course, the more Lockean belief of, everyone's a blank slate who is molded by their environment to become unique. Now, I could argue again with Locke, but still. There will always be those who follow these individual philosophers, but they still generally agree around the same principles. Like different apostles to the main liberal project. And then there's just a bunch of other groups. Because, like any good ideology or religious sect, you gotta have a bunch of them. Now, this becomes really important for politics. You see, because each ideology functions almost like its own religion, it must therefore supersede every other religion, or in this case, ideology. For example, if a socialist wants to take control of the United States, they cannot allow for the liberals to maintain their control over essentially the main belief system of the people. The people must become socialists for socialism to work. Because so long as the ideologies are different, well, then there are issues. Because when the people and the leadership disagree on what is inherently right, you cannot have a compromise, and likely what will end up happening is they will start fighting. Regardless of who wins, things are going to be lost for everyone, and it's not going to be good. So much like Christians evangelize to others, and Muslims do the same, so too do ideologies evangelize to people they wish to convert. The fascists do it, liberals do it, socialists do it. I am arguably doing it right now. And so they must basically convert every means of showing the culture to their side. This is why, for example, people mention like wokes in the media. Sure, progressives aren't fully socialist, but it follows that same idea of control the culture. You can control where their principles are and lead. Which, fun fact, was an actual socialist goal for a long time. Control of the institutions. It didn't fully work, but it was attempted, and you could argue it's still being attempted right now, because the Frankfurt School and the descendants of those belief systems. And we'll see how well that long march to the institutions goes. But, back to the main point. When it comes down to it, you gotta convert the people, no matter what belief system you have. And so things like the media, things like entertainment, things just like, well, who's writing this and who's interpreting that are very important, because, if you'll excuse me, here we go. This should work. So, if we look here at the Bill of Rights, we see each of them has their own inscription of basically how the country should run. It is up to the politicians and other believers of an ideology to interpret these, because, inherently, that is how they want to run their government. Because unless you want to make a new constitution, which some might argue for, these are what you have. So, for example, control of a culture involves changing what people generally believe about the Second Amendment or the First Amendment. If you can control what people believe this means and this means, then you can effectively control how they interpret what is right and wrong. Because there are a lot of people who just go, oh, yeah, it's in the Constitution, it's therefore acceptable. Now, I can think of a number of reasons on why that's not the case. For example, 13 right here. If we go all the way through. Here we go. Yeah, there is a bit of an issue with 13, mainly here. And people don't like it. Don't blame them. Kind of defeats the whole purpose of an anti-slavery amendment, but meh. Yeah, at least annoyed the South a bit. But with things like this, if you have people interpreting what this means, and everything else, then how that impacts law is going to be massive. Because with every amendment, regardless of how specialized or how broad, there will always be some interpretation that you can use to your advantage. Doesn't matter which one, doesn't matter how strict it is initially written. This is especially important because the courts are the ones who make the end ruling on that. And if you can successfully educate a bunch of lawyers to believe that this way of interpreting it, however you're trying to convince them, for example, let's say you try to convince them that Amendment number 2 does not give people the right to own any gun they want, then you have a bunch of lawyers who, when cases on things like gun control come up, they will side with you, or at least that's the hope. Does it always work? No, but it is effectively required to at least try it. Otherwise, you're not going to get much done. Anyways, I'll go more into depth about the amendments later. But that's for another time, so we shall skip it for now. Anyways, back to the main point. When it comes to political religion, generally speaking, people have certain beliefs that they really wish to protect. Now, I could go in and describe them and then break them apart if I so wish, but I do not feel like that is the most practical of things to do. Also, for those who stayed long enough, he is a dog. He is indeed a dog. But I will leave you with this. Regardless of where you draw the line on where one ideology begins and another ends, you will inevitably have to come to the point where you cannot compromise. If liberalism, for example, was negotiating and said, yeah, we're going to accept socialist principles, they would not survive. Now, granted, liberals are known for their tendency to be useful idiots, but if a liberal gave up everything that made them a liberal, their belief in natural rights, in equality before the law, in national brotherhood, if they gave up every single principle they had and let it go, at a certain point, they would no longer be a liberal. And it dooms the liberal project to do so. It is why the liberals have such an issue with those like socialists, because the socialists understand this. They don't just give up their belief system. The liberal, on the other hand, due to their generally compromising nature for being in charge for so long, regularly does, and they suffer because of it. So wherever you stand, you could follow my 3 principles of liberty, nobility, and merit. You could try sticking to the old liberal ways, or go even further back and try traditionalism. Ain't up to me, but it's up to you, and I give you this. No matter what you decide, Do not abandon your principles so easily.